or to my right, and we tried to work with some software to get him on the screen, but we just couldn't do it. It's pretty complicated. So Sebastian and I were on it all day, but you can see Jason on the computer good enough, and he can still answer your questions. So we're just going to go ahead and run with it. So to start off, if you guys have any specific questions you want to guarantee that either I see them or Jason sees them, make sure that you do a super chat, and Sebastian will send those right over to me. If you want to book my time, go ahead and email Sebastian we've got a new email address. It's georgegammon.contact@gmail.com. And I'm not sure how much longer I'll be doing that. So if you guys want to book a one-on-one session, you probably want to do it in the next couple weeks. And I think that's it. For those of you who don't know Jason Hartman, he is probably, well, he's not probably, he is one of the top real estate experts in the United States. And I've done several videos with him. He's a good buddy of mine. And I started listening to his podcast back in 2012. And that's really what helped me understand those linear markets that I always talk about. It helped me understand that a lot better. So if you have any specific questions for Jason, make sure that on the comments you say question Jason or question George, and that'll help me get to it a lot faster. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'll start. Okay, we've got a question for Jason. Which hybrid market do you recommend to go into? From Hugh Newen.
So George, I know we've had a bunch of technical problems. We might have one more.
What's that?
I hear a lot of echo. So I heard the question of which hybrid market.
That's correct. Yeah, your audio on my end is good.
Got you. It's just hard for me to track it. So
yes, so the question was, which hybrid market do you like the best right now?
Sure. I like several of them. We like Little Rock, although that's a small market, so there's not much inventory there. We like Jacksonville, Atlanta, Kansas City. I know you're very fond of Kansas City, and we like Dayton, Orlando. So we've got several good hybrid markets, and there are slight differences in the hybrid markets in terms of which ones are either more or less high. Oh, sorry, the question was hybrid market. I'd say the only hybrid market we're actually in right now is in Atlanta that I would consider a hybrid market. Most of ours are more linear.
Okay, and to expand on that, because I think that's a really good point, what makes you decide one linear market over the other? So let's say there's 10 linear markets in the United States, but right now you're only in 5 of them. What would make you exclude those other 5?
I know that a lot of people want to pick an investment market based on the market itself, but very frankly, a lot of our decision is based on how good the team is we have in any particular market.
Right.
It's not just the market. As I've said many times over the years, I would prefer a B market with an A team over an A market with a B team. The team outweighs the market to some extent, not completely.
And when you're talking about a team, you're talking about the property management company?
Talking about the local market specialists and the property management team on the ground, yes.
Right, and the specialist is who you're getting the turnkey property from.
Yes.
Okay, got it. All right.
Yeah, and George, I'm dealing with the delay. If I answer slowly, it's because I'm waiting for the echo to end. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, let's go to another question. Okay, guys, when you're putting in the questions, make sure you start with the word question so I can differentiate it. Okay, so Sebastian, I see Matt ask, I got that, so you don't have to text that to me. All right, so Matt, thanks for the super chat. He asks, George, do you have any mining stock picks? None specifically.
That's you.
Yeah, I'd start with Sprott and see what I'd watch some videos with Rick Rule. I'd start there with Rick Rule, Marin Katusa, and the best advice I can give you on that is to make sure that you're looking at a gold mining stock for the right reason. And so what's the right reason? You've got to compartmentalize a speculation with an investment and insurance. So in my opinion, the reason you should buy gold is not as a speculation, not as an investment. It's just as an insurance policy. That's it. So a miner, that would fall under my category of speculation. And you've got to allocate a certain percentage of your portfolio to doing that. In my case, it's a very small percentage of the portfolio. So I'd start with making sure that you understand that process. And then I'd start looking at Sprott or anything that Rick Rule is doing and try to go from there. Okay. All right, so boy, these questions are moving fast here. All right, here's one. Looks like for Jason, do your real estate investment techniques involve adjustable rate mortgages or just straightforward fixed rate mortgages? When is a good time to use an adjustable rate mortgage? The question's for you and I. I'll let you go ahead and answer that first because I think we agree on this one.
There are times occasionally when you might want to consider an adjustable rate mortgage, but we are far and away in a fixed rate market now. Yeah. So fixed rate is the way to go because we have historically low rates and artificially low rates and subsidized low rates. So definitely get a fixed rate mortgage now. There may be a time when you'd consider an adjustable rate mortgage, but this is certainly not one of those times.
Right. Okay. And I would agree with that. I don't know that for me personally, I'd do an ARM. I don't know I'd have to think that through under the conditions that would warrant that. But for me, just a safe bet is a fixed rate 30-year mortgage because you're shorting the dollar. And I could go down a list of reasons why I prefer that. Okay. Mitch asks, George, why has the Fed done over 4.5 trillion in repos, but their balance sheet has only grown by roughly 300 billion? Mitch, what you have to understand is how the repo market works. So imagine a pawn shop. That's the analogy that most people use. So you're going into a pawn shop, you're Deutsche Bank, and you say, pawn shop owner, I want $1 billion overnight, and I'm going to give you these treasuries that I have as collateral. And the pawn shop owner says, well, I don't know, Deutsche Bank, you're pretty risky, but okay, fine, we'll go ahead and do it. So the pawn shop owner gives Deutsche Bank $1 billion. And then Deutsche Bank, technically, it doesn't really happen this way, but technically gives the pawn shop owner the collateral, which is treasuries. And so then the next day, or if it's a term repo, maybe it's 14 days later, or some temporary time frame, they go ahead and switch back. So then Deutsche Bank comes back to the pawn shop with the cash, and then the pawn shop owner gives Deutsche Bank the treasuries back, which was the original collateral. So if the pawn shop is the Federal Reserve, when Deutsche Bank pays that money back, then that money's gone, poof, off the balance sheet. It no longer exists. So that's why the Federal Reserve can have, if you add up all of the repos that they've done, I'm not sure it'd be 4.5 trillion, but whatever it is, it's a lot more than 300 billion. That's why their balance sheet has only gone up by 300 billion. So why has it even gone up by 300 billion? Because they're not only doing repos right now, they're also doing open market operations where they are buying short-term treasuries and admitting that they're keeping them on their balance sheet to make sure that that Fed funds rate doesn't get out of hand. Okay, so then we've got Guyon. Thank you very much for the super chat. Guy one, I'm sorry. Thanks for the super chat. We really appreciate it. Okay, next question. All right, so we've got Damayan5 asks, one of the only things that seems relatively cheap right now is commodities. Any idea how or why to invest in that market? Well, I'm not going into how would be, that's a really drawn out answer. But as far as why, I think you said it, because they're cheap historically speaking. But again, you've got to understand that you can't invest in commodities. Well, you can, but I wouldn't invest in commodities as a investment. So let's look at my portfolio as an example, what I like to do. I like to have the bulk of it in investments that pay me to own them. So income properties is an example of that. Then I like to do maybe 5 or 10% just in insurance. So that would be gold. And then maybe 10% as a speculation, just to, you never know when you catch a good bet. So I would put commodities in that same bucket, the speculation bucket. So the reason I say that is because some people, if they see that, well, commodities are cheap, they'll just go all in. They'll put 50% of their portfolio in there. And I would never do that, ever. And it's just too risky. And the only thing that you can count on is the investment. And again, that it's paying you. Let me put it to you another way. The thing that you can count on the most is that when you invest in something, it's paying you to own it. So you're buying an income stream. As a rental property, as an example, you're buying the cash flow. You're not buying it because you think the asset itself will go up or down in value. You don't care. All you care about initially is just that cash flow. So that's the way that you hedge your downside, is that you're not buying something speculating that it's going up or down in price. And that's why the majority of my portfolio, I want in something that where the investment works from day one. From the day I buy it, that investment is producing what I want it to produce. Okay.
And George, of course, we talked about packaged commodities investing on the video you released this morning, and that's a great way to invest in commodities.
Absolutely. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, good point.
Because when you buy the real estate, when you buy that rental property, that income property, you're buying concrete, lumber, copper wire, glass, steel, all those ingredients of a house, and you're getting 80% of them financed by the bank on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Right.
Also, you're buying energy and you're buying money. That mortgage is a commodity, quite literally. It's a subsidized, artificially low rate commodity, that money.
Okay, so Macy J asks, and I'm going to answer this question specifically because she's talking, or he is talking about Brent Johnson, and I'm actually interviewing Brent Johnson, guys, on Tuesday. So that will come out, that interview will come out next weekend. So if you're a fan of Brent Johnson, or if you're not, make sure you look him up, because he's a really, really smart guy. He's on Macro Voices and Real Vision all the time. But make sure that you stay tuned for that video next weekend. So Brent Johnson says that the S&P is fueled by money from outside of the United States, not necessarily from QE. What is your stand on this? Well, I think that it's fueled by both, because I think Brent might have been saying that when the Fed was doing QT, so they're reducing the size of their balance sheet. So in that case, that you would have the the opposite. They're taking money, technically, they're supposed to be taking money out of the system. So if you've got the stock market going to all-time highs, then that is all of the people in Japan and Europe and the pension funds over there that are in the midst of negative interest rates, negative nominal interest rates. They need a place to put that money. So Brent's position is that that's the United States, where if you're a pension fund that has $10 billion and you're in Europe, where are you going to put that money? That it's the only place that you can put it is in the United States. It's not that the United States is good. And Brent would argue that. He's not saying that he's bullish on the fundamentals of the United States, quite to the contrary. But what he's saying is just the cleanest dirty shirt in the hamper. And so, but I also think that a lot of or even more so, what's driving the market are stock buybacks. And if you look at a chart, I've used this on several videos, you'll see that almost 100% of the stock market gain from 2010 to where we are today has been a result of corporate buybacks, which is a result of what? It's the pension funds going further out the risk curve to try to get that 7% that they need to meet their liabilities. And so how does that work? You've got this giant pension fund, let's call it CalPERS, and they need this, they're underfunded, they need a Hail Mary. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna lever up. They're going to take $10 billion and they're going to borrow 100 million or 100 billion against that 10 million. And then they're going to take all of that and go into the corporate bond market because they think they can get a 3 or 4% return with low risk. And then of course the corporations take that cheap money and they know there's a Fed put, so they go right into the market, they buy their shares back. So I would argue that that's just as much of a driver of the stock market being at all-time highs right now as the foreign capital flight would be. Okay, we have, okay, got a super chat from XRP Bull on the Moon. And with no question, just thank you very much. We really appreciate that. XRP Bull on the Moon. Okay, so we've got another question. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. I apologize. It says, George, if you knew with 100% certainty, I can almost answer this without going any further. I emphasize 100% certainty. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. That the gold standard was coming back in 2 to 3 years, would you increase your position higher than 10%? Yeah, of course. If I knew it 100%, I'd go all in. But let me preface.
Coming back.
Let me preface was there's no way that you can know anything in life 100%. There are no certainties in life, especially when you're dealing with a complex system like markets. You have to look at markets like the weather, in the sense that there's so many variables that even the best scientists out there can't predict the weather more than 10 days out at the max. And most of the time they're still wrong. So the markets are a complex system, just like the weather and just like nature. So you're never, ever, ever going to be able to have a 100% bet. In fact, a lot of people have gone back and studied guys like Soros and Druckenmiller, and even those guys are only right 51, maybe 52% of the time. So they're right, they're wrong almost half the time. So you say, well, how do they make these billions of dollars? It's because their money management skills. If they got a winner, they ride the winner and they cut their losers short. So there's nothing that's 100%, not even real estate. And that's got the best likelihood of producing, but there's always risks. Jason, you got something to add, buddy?
Couple comments on that one, George. I would bet with 100% certainty
the opposite.
that the standard is not coming back.
Well, okay. So I would disagree. I would disagree with that with 100%. But in 2 to 3 years, that's That's
really,
not
wow.
likely.
Okay, that's interesting.
The gold standard?
Okay, so another comment on that though. You talked about some of the famous investment gurus, right?
Yeah.
And how they're wrong. Well, guess who else is wrong and who has more information than anybody? The government and the central bankers.
Right.
And they're wrong too.
Right.
So it is absolutely like the weather. That's a great comparison.
Yeah. Okay, looks like we've got a super chat from Kevin. Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate it. Says, guys, we are getting about 100K in cash and want to invest in more rentals, but my wife only wants to buy and rent condos. With condo association in mind, would you buy individual condos? Jason, you want to take that one?
I don't like condos. I'm not saying I'll never buy one. I've certainly purchased many of them over the years, but all things being equal, I would much rather have a single family home. You've all heard as investors about the concept of intermediary party risk. And when you have a homeowners association, you essentially have another intermediary that's in the middle of that. Now, if you control that association and you own 51% of the units or 51% of the voting rights in that HOA, that's different. But if you don't have that, and that homeowners association gets into litigation, which every HOA practically gets into litigation, they either sue the developer for construction defects, or one of their members sues them for something or other, whatever it is. When that litigation happens, many times it will scare lenders away. And when the lenders are scared away and the financing dries up, the buyers dry up. And when the buyers dry up, the prices plummet. So I would prefer to avoid condos whenever possible.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that in the United
If the deal is
States.
great, I might do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some opportunities for that outside the United States, but inside, I'd much prefer a single family home. Okay, so we've got a comment that says the super chat folks had questions. So I apologize if we didn't see that on our end. I see a question here from XRP Bull, so I'm going to go to that right now. With the impending market collapse on the horizon, would you still recommend a refinance and use the capital on another property? If nobody is working, will there be people to pay the rent? So I'll go ahead and start, and then we'll have Jason give his opinion on this as well. When you're talking about the market, you're talking about the housing market. So I go back to the fact that you're buying cash flow. We've got that established. So you're asking, okay, what happens if the economy goes into the gutter and no one is able to afford rent? Well, that is a possibility, but you've got to remember the types of properties that I like to buy. And I think Jason would second this. And that's, you're not going in and buying $500,000 homes or mansions on the lake and trying to rent them out on Airbnb. You're buying a very modest, I call them starter homes. So that's not to say that they're in the ghetto, that they can be in an awesome neighborhood. That's what I like, with a great school district. But there's someone that a young family that just got married, that's got a 2-year-old kid or a 4-year-old kid. That's what they're going to start. That's the first home that they're going to move into. So in the area I like in Kansas City, that's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot, that you're going to be able to get a 1% RV ratio on it if you buy right. That's in a fantastic school district. So the reason I say that is because if we go through an economic collapse, let's call it, you're going to have the people that can now afford a $300,000 home. Well, that's going to just ratchet down, and they're going to be able to afford your home. Or that maybe if we get bad enough, the people that can afford $1 million home, well, now they can afford your starter home. At some point, that we would have to get to a position where it gets Venezuela bad, in order for people not to be able to afford that starter home, because that's all the way down at the bottom of the totem pole. So Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely, George. That was a good explanation. And I would make that example, look at it like two ladders. You've got one ladder here, and this is the socioeconomic ladder, and another ladder over here. Well, most of the time when things get bad, you'll catch people moving down the socioeconomic ladder, and they need a place to live in, right? So everyone needs a place to live in. It's a basic human need. The three basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, right? Let them rent the shelter from you. So if you survey that tenant, they may say they came from a 2,000 square foot house and now they're moving into your 1,300 square foot house. Fine. Okay, their standard of living declined, but they still need a place to live and they can rent it from you. Right. And so there's always an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. You'll catch people moving up, starting out. That'll be their first home, or you'll catch them moving down. Either way. But if you're in the high-end market and you only have high-end properties, right, and you're a speculative investor, you're in trouble because you only have one type of person you can help. That's why you want these bread and butter rentals that are just basic housing.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that if you go back and look at the last housing crisis that we had, you can see what rents did. And rents actually went up because if you go through a housing bust and fewer people can afford to buy homes, well, to Jason's point, they still need shelter, so they're going to become renters. So you're going to increase the size of the pool of renters, or the demand that you have for your property. Now, that said, if we have a Great Depression for 10 or 15 years, then you could get into a situation where people are, families are moving in and you've got 10 people living in a house, a lot like what they do in some of the South American countries to get by. But if you've got a recession or even a real steep depression that just lasts, and when I mean that, I'm talking about negative GDP, for 3 or 4 years, that's not long enough, in my opinion, for people to change their living habits. And so that would mean that rents would most likely increase. So you got some cushion there against some potential equity going down. But again, that's market price, and we're not really worried about that. We're worried about cash flow.
Right, you're worried about cash flow, definitely. And there are only two major things you really have to worry about: a serious population decline, right, a major decline in population. Now, that doesn't have to be countrywide. It could be in a specific area. If you owned property in Detroit, for example, a very blighted area, and everybody leaves that city that is now, less than half of what it used to be in terms of population, you've got a problem, okay? And then the other problem is simply, I'm waiting for the echo, sorry, it's hard. Simply where you have government intervention. And this did happen during part of the Great Recession, where it sort of perverted the market, where, like you said, George, ultimately rents went up because if people can't buy, they have to rent. So the people that get foreclosed on, they move into the renter pool. They're certainly not buying. They don't have the credit score to buy. So that's good news for investors, right? But in the meantime, when the government was interfering with everything and telling the lenders not to foreclose in 2008, when they were, we had the presidential candidates, the whole mantra was keep people in their house. Well, a lot of those people didn't deserve to be in that house. They were in a house way more expensive than they can afford, and they were living in it for free. Now, the government sort of perverted the market for a while. Ultimately, it equalized. And when those foreclosures happened and you had what they call price discovery, right, that's good news. That's what an economy needs to heal. That's why the government needs to just get out of the way and let the pain happen. And it'll be quick and everybody will get through it. But when they intervene, it actually prolongs the pain and makes the problem worse with the bailouts and the corporate socialism and all that stuff that, of course, you talk about on your show all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that super chat that we missed before. The question is, I think both of us on this one, is should I buy property now or wait till after the U.S. election? And I'll go ahead and start because I know you're on the audio's on a time delay. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that initially.
Yeah.
What I would pay more attention to is where you're buying. That's
an interesting question for sure. But first of all,
you got it? Okay.
Okay, I'll go.
Okay, go.
When you have this delay, you don't know who should talk first. First off, and you've all heard it, trying to time the market is a bit of a fool's errand, right? It's very hard to time the market. And so that's the first thing. Just buy good properties that make sense the day you buy them, and you'll be in good shape. Okay, don't speculate. If you're speculating, that's when you have to worry about timing the market. The way you know if a property makes sense the day you buy it is, do you have a good rent to value ratio? If you're getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% per month, in other words, if that property is $100,000 and it rents for $1,000 a month or somewhere near there, that's a pretty good deal, and you're going to be okay. And you're investing for yield, you're going to be fine, okay? And you don't have to worry about the election. And by the way, if the election goes the other way that you think is going to hurt the market, it could end up being worse. So I wouldn't worry about that. You're not a speculator in our program in the way George and I invest. You're a long-term value investor applying sort of the Warren Buffett ideology to income property.
Yeah. And so what I would say to add a little to that is I wouldn't be as concerned. Well, I don't want to say I wouldn't be concerned about who wins the election, because that's definitely a concern. But, listen, both parties are terrible. It's just how bad is or how worse is one than the other. But I would be more focused on the area and the laws in that area. So as an example, in Kansas City is split into two sides. You've got the Kansas side and the Missouri side. The Kansas side is much more landlord friendly, and the Missouri side is much more, or excuse me, it's vice versa. The Kansas is much more tenant friendly, and Missouri is much more landlord friendly. So I would look at that and say, okay, I want to go into Missouri. Or if I'm looking at a state like California, I would say, okay, what are the laws here? Then I would recognize that, well, they're moving quickly in the direction of rent control, and I would want absolutely no part of that. So that I'd kind of switch your focus from the federal government to the local level and kind of start from there. Okay, so the high vis economist.
All real estate is local.
Yeah. The high vis economist, thank you very much for the super chat, says, purely hypothetical. If we had an incredible derivative bank failure, wouldn't trillions of FDIC injections be a great place to implement MMT, stop a bank run, and kill deflation? Well, to start off, if you guys didn't see my video the other day, I think the reason why high vis economist is asking this is because he or she realizes that the FDIC only has maybe 100 billion in the fund right now, and there's 9+ trillion in deposits that they insure with that 100 billion or so. So you're looking at about 1%. So there wouldn't have to be a high rate of failure with the banks or the derivatives, which those are pretty much one and the same right now, in order for the FDIC to need a bailout, which the FDIC did in its prior iteration back in the savings and loan crisis, late 1980s, early 90s. That was actually the corporation that had the insurance there kind of merged into the FDIC because of that bailout. So I don't think that would come with the implementation of MMT. I just think it would be a bailout from the government or from the Federal Reserve, because it's within the banking system, of them just printing money to make the FDIC whole, however much they were upside down, or however the level of insolvency, they would just patch that or plug that up with newly printed money, which would potentially have the exact same effect, because that's being injected into the real economy, which, if you guys listen to my interview with Eric Townsend, that's the big difference between the Fed printing money and injecting it into the financial economy, or printing money and injecting it into the real economy. The difference is the velocity would increase going into the real economy, and therefore you'd have a much better chance of seeing that serious inflation. Okay, Michael, thanks for the super chat, Michael. He asks hi to both Jason and I. I'm at work, so we'll post the question then, return to work, and watch the replay later. Okay, got it. Aussie property is at historic highs at major metro centers. Regional, less so. Thoughts on investment property? P.S. Don't tell my boss. All right, Michael. I can't speak for Jason, but I promise I won't tell your boss anything. As far as
I won't tell him.
Okay, good. I'll start that. I don't like the Aussie property market at all, because I like to look at what's cheap first and foremost. So then you ask the question, well, George, why can you consider any real estate in the United States? Because it's not cheap. And I would agree, even in the linear markets, those homes that Jason and I like aren't cheap. But what is cheap is the cash flow relative to everything else. So you've got to start with the cash flow in Australia or in maybe some of the outskirts and say, can I at least get cheap cash flow? And you have to start with the RV ratio. So my first question would be, can you get at least a 1% RV ratio in any of these areas that you're looking at in Australia? My guess would be not even close, not even remotely close. I would be surprised if you could even get a 0.5% RV ratio, let alone a 1%. So to me, that says, okay, not only is the asset that I'm buying extremely overpriced, but so is the cash flow. And my number one rule of investing is you only buy what's cheap and you sell what's expensive. So if both those things are expensive, I would not be a buyer. Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree, George. And I agree with you. There's another question in here about international investing. Maybe you want to take that one now. It's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, go ahead and take that if you can read it or if you can see it.
Yeah, I can read it. It was just basically, well, let me see if I can.
Oh, I see.
It's from Abraham Fowler. Is that how you say that? Yeah. And I would say that the U.S. is a very special market. And I have looked all over the world at properties. I visited 83 countries. I was born overseas. I am not being America-centric. All I'm saying is that the U.S. has a really unique market in many ways. Number one, it's got the best financing. It's subsidized by the government. Ever since the Great Depression, you've got these government-sponsored entities, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the financing here is fantastic. It's very rare to find a 3-decade-long fixed-rate mortgage in any other country. Think about it. If you get a mortgage today, you don't have to make the last payment on that mortgage, or I should say your tenant doesn't have to make the last payment on that mortgage until 2050. Mm-hmm. The demographers predict that in 2050, the United States will have almost 100 million more people. It'll be over 400 million people in this country. So there's a lot of demand coming, number one. But also the U.S. has a very transparent real estate market, and it's pretty easy to trade real estate in the U.S. It's not complex. It's not opaque. You have a very well-developed MLS system here. You have very well-developed data so that you can find what a property is worth and you can establish the value of it. Also, you have good rule of law and you have cheap real estate. some of the examples, I took my mastermind group to Dubai a couple of years ago, and what an amazing place. But the real estate prices are through the roof. Dubai is a very cyclical market. We do not like cyclical markets. And if you want to know more about that, look at the video that George and I released this morning, where we talked in detail about the Hartman Risk Evaluator, which is a way to virtually eliminate your downside risk or massively reduce it when investing. So places like, take for example Europe. You ask about the EU. I was born in Europe, and lots of regulation, very hard to do business, high property prices in most areas. Almost everything overseas is a condo rather than a single family home. You do not have well-developed multiple listing type services. It's very hard to establish the value of the property. And there's a very low velocity. George on his show, on his Great Whiteboard Educations, talks about the velocity of money a lot. And I'll just say here, there's also the velocity of property. In the US, you have a high velocity of property, meaning there's a lot of trading going on, which establishes value and reduces volatility because you have a healthy amount of trading to establish prices in a marketplace. In a lot of European markets, people pass their properties from generation to generation. There's just not a lot of trading. The US has a very well-developed marketplace in terms of data, in terms of trading, in terms of financing. So I like the US. I have tried to invest. I took an Eastern European tour when Bulgaria and Romania became part of the EU, and I thought for sure I was going to go buy property in Bansko, Bulgaria, and in Romania too. I looked at a lot of overseas stuff in Latin America, in Central America. Couldn't see anything that even came close to what the US had to offer.
Yeah. Okay, so let me add a little bit to that. I like foreign real estate, but it comes with a caveat, and that is that we'll use where I am right now in Medellin, Colombia. So everything that Jason just said is absolutely true. The market in Medellin is highly inefficient. And the reason it's inefficient is because there's very low amounts of debt in the system.
No financing.
So no financing. And so there's not much liquidity. So that turnover that Jason is talking about, it is absolutely true. It happens a lot slower here. Even if you've got a fantastic property in a fantastic location at a fantastic price, it'll still take you got to at least count on 6 months, probably 6 months to a year to actually sell that property. Where in the United States, I mean, if you're in a good market, you're gonna have a bidding war after it being on the MLS for 24 hours. The difference is that if you can use that to your advantage, then it's a really good deal. But to do that, you have to be a local expert. So using me as an example, I've been investing in Medellin since 2015. I know these areas like the back of my hand. I don't need an MLS. I don't need Zillow. I don't need anything. I've got Sebastian a couple times a week going out and literally walking up and down the streets in the neighborhoods where I like to buy, trying to find motivated sellers. So if you can do that in a foreign market, then you've got an opportunity to make a ton of money, not only on the rent, but on the equity build through forced depreciation and a remodel. But if you don't have time to be that local expert, if you live in the United States and you just want to come down to Colombia really quick for a week and just buy whatever you see from some sort of gringo realtor, you're going to pay gringo prices and you're not going to get a decent RV ratio. And then you're going to get stuck with it because you're not going to have the return. And then when you go to sell it, you're not going to be able to sell it because you can't sell it at a low enough price because you overpaid to begin with.
Right.
So all the challenges of the markets outside the United States that Jason is talking about are 100% true. It's just a matter of whether or not you have the expertise to take
Right.
advantage of that. And that's where you really have to be honest with yourself. And most people aren't. Most people think that they know. I won't go into that, but most people just don't know enough about the local market to be effective. So that's my position on that.
And George, one thing to add to that question was really a two-layered question. Number one, it's about international investing. And number two, it's really about linear versus cyclical markets. So most of the EU and certainly Dubai, for example, I think it was about the UAE too, right? Or Dubai specifically. Those are cyclical markets that you want to avoid anyway.
Right.
So really kind of a two-part question.
Right.
Now, Medellin would be a linear market, wouldn't it? Or I don't know enough about it.
Well, let me tell you how linear it actually is. If I've done a
study,
I've done a study going back to 1999. I found some research. It's tough to find, but I actually found some data on it. And if you adjust for inflation, going back to 1999, the prices have increased. Not annually, but over that entire time, the prices have increased by 12%. So in the last 20 years, the prices have gone up 12%. That's about as linear can be. So anyway,
wow.
Right.
Yikes.
Yeah, that's it really just goes up with inflation.
Yeah. It doesn't get much more linear than that.
Right. So anyway, guys, if you want to invest outside of the United States, you've got to have a completely different skill set, and you've got to be doing it for a different type of reason. If you want to get more into the weeds, just go ahead and contact Sebastian, and I can go over it with you on a Skype call. Okay, going back to the super chats here. We've got Michael. Oh, no, that's the guy that doesn't want us to tell his boss. Okay, I better not say his name again. All right, so Sanity asks, oh, I see. Home prices go down or we get inflation. What comes first and why? I'm thinking that's their question. It's a little bit in code here, but so they're talking about nominal prices really. And if they're assuming that if we do get inflation, that prices are going to go up nominally, the home prices. But see, I don't know that that's a good way to look at it, because we have so much debt in the system, and mortgage rates or not mortgage rates, but the mortgage debt in the system is at all-time highs. So if you go back to the financial crisis, you'll actually see that housing prices and the stock market went down in excess of 50%. But the CPI, and that's the CPI that they'll admit to, was actually positive. We didn't get negative CPI. We might have for maybe a quarter or two, but not for the entire year. So that means that consumer prices went up while asset prices went down by 50%. So I want to make sure that when people are thinking about this, it's like this three-dimensional puzzle when you can have different things going up and down at the exact same time. In other words, we can have price inflation while at the same time having asset deflation. And that's really the way I want you to, or I'd suggest thinking about it. Anthony, thank you very much for the super chat. Anthony, this is a question for Jason. All right, cool. I'm working with a cash investor. I'm the guy doing the work. Okay. I'm finding it hard to buy BMV. I'm not sure what that, hopefully Jason will know what BMV stands for. Please, can I ask what other ways can I add value to my investor?
What's BMV?
Did he say, Sebastian, what BMV is?
I do not know. No, below market value, maybe?
Oh, that's probably it. There you go. Yeah.
below market value. So if you're doing the work, how can you add value?
Yeah.
Well, just make the property look great, make it very appealing, and improve the value. You know, the good old fixer-upper. It's packaging, right? Is that the question?
I think the question is more so, he's saying he's the guy that's doing all the work, finding the property, remodeling the property, and then potentially selling it to make a profit, like flipping it, or keeping it in a rental portfolio. And he's just using OPM, other people's money. And he's saying that how can he do that when he can't find a deal that's below market value? And my answer would be, you really can't. If you're flipping and you can't find anything where you're going to have ROI, then you can't do it. You're not going to make money. So if you're flipping right now, you've got to be amazing at wholesaling. You have to have the bandit signs up. You've got to have, I mean, it needs to be a business in and of itself, meaning finding the deals. And if you don't have that infrastructure set up, or if you're not that guy that's out there cold calling and looking up the tax records and you know, driving for dollars and doing all these things, right now the market is so hot, it's just not a good time to flip properties. You got to look at cash flow, or else you got to sit on the sidelines for a while. That would be my advice. Jason, would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. You know, the people who are successful flippers nowadays are businesses. They're companies that are in the business of flipping homes. They've got staffs of people. They have expensive subscriptions to services that feed them all the properties. They spend thousands and thousands of dollars a month mailing out little yellow postcards. You know, if you own properties, you get these postcards. They have systems and CRM systems, and they text you and they call you, and they have telemarketing companies calling owners to try to get them to sell. It's incredibly hard. I mean, finding a below market property in a desirable area that's a desirable property nowadays, very difficult. In fact, most of the home flippers have gone into the business of development from scratch. They're just buying lots and building houses because they're finding it incredibly difficult to find properties. Yeah. So, you know, we're just not in the business of flipping. We just believe in buy and hold investing because flipping is a business. If you want to be a flipper, you got to set up a company and an infrastructure. Being a one-person shop running around in a pickup truck is going to be pretty hard to do it. Now, interestingly, you can do that in a place like where George lives in Medellin, okay? Because in that type of market, you've got a much slower moving market where you actually could find an opportunity. I mean, George, would you agree with that? But finding that in the U.S. in a good, vibrant market, very difficult. Yeah,
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons why I'm able to do well in Medellin, is because I have that infrastructure set up. I've got an architect that's been working with me since 2014, husband and wife team. The wife's the designer. I brought them here from Ecuador, and they work for me full time. When you include the subcontractors, I probably have 20 people here working on properties or finding deals. And it's gotten to the point where I've built that up and created that infrastructure. So now I only have to check on the properties maybe once a week at the most. It's kind of it just runs itself, but it takes a lot of work to get it to that point. Now, that said, that's one of the benefits of the Medellin market because of the inefficiencies. It's not like the United States, and I do get deals here. I don't find them all the time, but a couple times a year, I'll find a deal that I can get, 50% under market value, 50% under market value. And the reason I can is because there's very little liquidity in the market, and you find a seller that just has to sell. They have to sell. Whether it's a medical emergency, maybe they got it in a divorce. I mean, who knows what happened, but they have to have that cash. And if you're the only guy or girl standing there that's holding cash, you're basically going to be able to name your price. So that's when you're able to take advantage of the fact that you can't sell things very quickly here, as you just make all your money on the buy side, all your money on the buy side. And so hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to keep moving on here. Okay, Conrad asks, brokerage companies like Fidelity and Schwab safe in a downturn? No, they're not safe in a downturn. Any financial institution that you work with, whether it's a bank or a brokerage, they are counterparty risk. So, and I want to be clear, I did a video the other day where I said that I would suggest keeping your cash in short-term T-bills, so 3 months, 6 months. And I had a lot of people in the comments say, oh, there's no way I'd keep my life savings in treasuries. No way, that's crazy, that's crazy, that's crazy. But they really misunderstood what I was saying. I wasn't saying take your entire life savings and put it into short-term treasuries. What I was saying is that whatever portion of your portfolio that you want to have right now in cash, just to maybe take advantage of a downturn, maybe have some dry powder. I don't know what that percentage is. It's different for me. I'm sure Jason has a different number. Maybe for you, it's 5%. Maybe it's 0%. But whatever percentage of your portfolio you want to allocate to cash, that is what I would suggest having in T-bills, because I would rather have that counterparty risk, just lending my money to the government for 3 months, as opposed to having that counterparty risk in a CD or a money market account where it's being potentially lent out to Deutsche Bank via the repo market or the FX swap market. And then the same holds true with a brokerage account. But now let me say that to take it a step further, if you've got that money that's allocated specifically to speculation, then it might be a little bit different. But again, I would be very hesitant right now with as much risk as there is in the overall market and as much systemic risk, I would be hesitant there. Okay, moving on. Spectre, thanks for the super chat. Just says, found your content to be very informative. I really appreciate we work super hard here. And sometimes we got to do a lot of makeshift stuff, but at the end of the day, we make it happen. That is right. Zik of Foos, thank you very much for the super chat. He or she asks, in Jersey City, a 4-unit brownstone is $1 million with $18,000 in taxes. Oh my gosh, whoa. Rent is $2K a month per unit. This area will double, we hope, catching up to New York prices, but maybe it's at the top.
Run.
What, WYD? Taxes are scary. What is WYD? Anyway, okay, I think I'm not sure what the abbreviation stands for, but I'll run with it here. So first thing, you got to look at what your mortgage payment would be on that. And you got to look at a $1 million property. So a 1% RV ratio on that would be $10,000 a month. And you're looking at $8,000 a month. So that would be less than a 1% RV ratio. Plus, you're in an area that, boy, we could really have some downside there. So I don't want to speak for Jason, but what I would do is I would consider taking that equity out of that market and moving it into a more favorable market where your RV ratios are going to be higher and your downside is going to be lower because of what Jason was saying on the Hartman risk evaluator, with the land being a smaller percentage of the overall value. And I would also insert the fact that in a lot of those linear markets, the price to income ratio is a lot more reasonable, which would also limit your downside. And you're able to buy properties at less than the cost of construction. And so the bottom line is I prefer to take that equity and move it to a different market. Jason, anything to add? You heard the delay here.
So on that property, was that 2,000 or were there multiple units in there? I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah.
Was that a 2-family home or a 4-family home, or for $1 million, or one?
Four unit, each unit's $2K a month.
Okay.
So 8,000 total.
So it's 8,000 per month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's still not good because, number one, not enough diversified risk. And with that tax bill being $12,000, you've got to get a better RV ratio to offset that tax bill. The property is really more than $1 million because the taxes are so high.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly don't love that kind of deal, but I hate to tell you no and have you see that property go up in value. But those kinds of properties are not doing that well now. But you know, a prediction is usually worth what it costs. So,
okay,
that's too speculative for my taste.
I agree. All right, Ibrahim, thank you very much for the super chat. Thanks for spending all the time answering my questions. We'll read on overseas investing in the U.S. I live in Europe. Okay. Chris, thanks for the super chat. Asks Jason. He says, Jason, if you were just starting out and had no real estate yet, would you buy rentals in today's market? If so, what and where?
Yeah. I would definitely buy nice conservative rental properties in linear markets that make sense from day one. And I look at places like Jacksonville, Little Rock, Indianapolis, Atlanta, Jackson, Mississippi, Orlando, Florida. Those kinds of markets work, okay? And I would definitely buy them. I wouldn't worry about timing the market. Those are just good properties that will make sense regardless of what happens in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, Hugh Newen, thanks for the super chat. And this is for Jason as well. Would you recommend to buy in Orange County, California right now to live in long-term, or wait after the election? I'm in OC, I'm a California resident.
With the echo, I can't tell when you're finished talking or not. I don't know which George I'm hearing, if it's the first one or the second one. So pardon the slow answers. So Orange County, I spent most of my adult life in Orange County. I loved it. I lived in Irvine and Newport Beach, and that's a great place. I would never buy in Orange County and I bought many properties there over the years when I thought I was an investor, but I was really just a speculator. Orange County doesn't work because the rent to value ratio never works. That's a cyclical market. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to rent a nice high-end property at a very favorable RV ratio that's favorable to the tenant, not to the owner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can rent a $1 million house in Orange County for about $4,000 or $4,500 a month. That's a great deal. You can take that $1 million and buy 10 properties in markets we recommend and get around 1% per month. That would be $10,000 a month. So you're basically arbitraging. You're owning the properties, the cheap rental properties you rent to other people that get close to a 1% RV or rent to value ratio, and you're renting a property that gets a 0.45 RV ratio for yourself. That's a great deal. It's a double arbitrage.
Yeah.
Do that all day long.
Yeah, and for more on that, guys, if you go to the to my YouTube channel, I've got a video and the thumbnail says rent or buy ? And if you go to that video and click on it, you'll see that I actually go through that exact math. And so you can see exactly what Jason's talking about, and you can see all the numbers behind it and why at the end of the 30 years, you're gonna make out like a bandit if you just use that RV ratio arbitrage. Okay, we've got, let's see, yeah, Jet. Thanks for the super chat, Jet. And again, this is for Jason, so there's going to be a little bit of a time lag, guys. Just bear with us. We appreciate your patience. He says, Jason, is it best to use a corporation to capture the rental income on my first property to then seek additional financing for a subsequent property, or what type of corporation?
Well, most people, when they're buying real estate, they use an LLC rather than a corporation.
That's what I use.
But residential income property is not really friendly to entities. And here's why. The great lenders that offer the highly desirable financing are through the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac or agency system, where these are these sort of government subsidized mortgages, right? They will not finance property inside of an entity. You've got to put it in your own name to get the financing. So you would get much less desirable financing. You can do it if you use an entity. So I would not recommend that. Just buy the property in your name and have good insurance and have good practices, and you shouldn't have any problem. I have had hundreds and hundreds of tenants over the years in many, many properties, and I have never been sued by a tenant. You hear lawyers out using scare tactics trying to get you to set up all sorts of entities. You know, oh, what happens when they slip and fall on a banana peel? Well, all I can tell you is it's never happened to me, and I've never heard it happening to any one of our thousands of investor clients. Okay, it could happen though. I don't want to say it can't. So, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving legal advice. But you just have good insurance. It's just not that big a deal.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. When I first got into real estate, I was of the same mindset. I was very phobic of it, of liability. And my real estate lawyer, and she represented both landlords and tenants. She says, George, when I go to court over a lawsuit, 99.9999999% of the time, it's the landlord suing the tenant. She goes, in my 25 years of doing this, I might have had one or two tenants going the other way. So, and to Jason's point, he works with literally thousands of investors all over the world who buy
that's
properties.
A good point. It's usually the tenant that gets sued, not the landlord.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay. Let's see next. Dimitri asks, George, what's your opinion on Chicago or Philadelphia real estate? So Chicago, I don't like, because I think the only way that they're going to be able to fund or not the only way they can fund it, but what they're targeting right now, and I think we've seen this in the news, is property taxes. So they're looking at that gaping hole that they have in their pension system and saying, okay, how do we fill this? Because we're not getting a return in the market. We can't do that. And they're going right after property taxes, meaning they're jacking property taxes to the moon. So I would not want to be in any type of market where I know that my assets have a giant target on them. As far as Philadelphia, I don't know that market really well. I would assume that that's more of a cyclical or hybrid market. That said, outside Philadelphia, in other areas of Pennsylvania that might be a little bit more rural, you could, potentially find some opportunity there, but it goes back to that RV ratio. That's where you've got to start because you're buying the cash flow. So if you could go into Philadelphia or the surrounding areas and find something that was attractive, then I'd say maybe look at it. But for me, definitely not Chicago. Like Conrad asks, thanks for the super chat, Conrad. Want to get into mining stocks. Is there any safe way? Simple. No, there's not. Because mining stocks are basically a leveraged way to play.
George, do you want me to take a comment on that, by the way? Oh, go ahead.
You want to do Philadelphia?
Oh. The Chicago comment. That's what I was talking about. There's a delay. or Chicago. I just wanted to comment on Chicago specifically. Yeah, okay. So everything George says is absolutely accurate. Chicago has a giant pension crisis. It's a left-wing city. It's not very landlord-friendly. However, I want to say one thing in Chicago's defense, and it's kind of a big deal. If you talk to anyone around the world who is traveling to the U.S. for their first time, and you ask them where they're going, they will only pick a few cities that are the sort of world-class cities. What are they? New York, L.A., San Francisco, maybe Miami, and guess what's next? Chicago is next, okay? Chicago is the only inexpensive world-class city. It's the only one that you can make sense of. I agree, the taxes, they are raising them, absolutely true. There's just that one thing in its defense. It's the only sort of world-class city that's actually still cheap.
Mm-hmm.
None of those others come anywhere near affordable and workable in terms of RV ratios. That's all.
Right. Okay, cool. So I think I was in the middle of Conrad's question there, wasn't I, Sebastian? I'll take that. So Conrad, no, there are no safe mining stocks. They are a speculative way to play gold, which is insurance. And what I was saying is that they're basically a leveraged way to play gold in the sense that if gold goes up, generally speaking, the miners will go up more. And if gold goes down, generally the miners will go down more. So there, in my experience, there is no safe way to play that. And again, we're putting it into the speculative bucket there. Only way to safe play for miners is to buy physical gold. All right, neurosurgery, Highland Neurosurgery. Thank you very much for the super chat. See, how do you take equity out? Also sent request for Skype call with you, but no response. Okay, so Sebastian, please make note of that. And if you do if we had a little trouble with our email server there, that's why we switched to a new email. So if you guys are trying to get a hold of Sebastian to set up a consultation call, make sure moving forward that you use the email address georgegammon.contact@gmail.com. And I apologize for not getting back to you. We'll definitely get on that. So as far as taking equity out, how would you take equity out? I'm assuming you've got a lot of equity in a house that you want to take out to invest it maybe in another property or another asset. Boy, that's tough because I don't know your personal situation. I don't know where the equity is that you're trying to extract. I don't know how much equity, but let me tell you what I do personally, and I'd love to get Jason's feedback on this. Whenever I have a lot of equity in a property, the first thing I do is go set up a line of credit at the bank, because I don't want to take that cash out because I have to start paying for it right away. And if I don't have a way to get a good return on that, well, then I'm paying for that money while it's sitting there doing nothing, and it's not making me any money. So if you set up a line of credit, then you don't have to pay for it unless you actually use it. So you set up a line of credit, you find an asset that you want to purchase, then you purchase the asset. So you're getting paid that money to pay back your debt, and it's not costing you anything to hold that debt and wait for that opportunity. And then once you take out the line of credit and once you use that line of credit, then you can go ahead and term it out. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got a $500,000 line of credit and you want to buy 5 income properties, $100,000 each. So you take out that line of credit, you buy 1 property at a time. That will probably take you a year, let's say, to do that. Do it well. And then after that, so you're taking that money out 1 step at a time through that line of credit, not all at once. And then once you get those rental properties that you want to hang on to for the next 20 or 30 years, then go back to the bank and say, okay, with this $500,000 in debt that I now have with this line of credit, let me go ahead and just roll that over into a fixed rate 30-year mortgage. And then you're just kind of swapping it out. And so, Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, as you know, George, and I know we both agree on this one, I'm definitely a believer in what I call, and some people use that term, of equity stripping. The least safe place you can keep your money is in the property. The property is a tremendous asset, but it's not a great bank. So strip that equity out and have control of that money. If the recession comes or the depression comes, it's better to have that equity out of the property. And I know that question got a little complex in terms of using a credit line and this and that. So I may have missed something in the question because of the echo. I'm sort of hearing you talk over yourself when I hear you. But equity stripping is definitely a good plan. And we talked about that on the video we released this morning, George, when we talked about the risk evaluator, and I told my own story of how I did equity stripping on the property we used as an example.
Okay. All right, so Geo Rob, my buddy Geo, good to see you. Thanks for being on the Super Chat. Geo says, highly recommend a one-on-one with George. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just spoke with, I'm not going to give out your name, but you and your wife, just for the viewers, we had a really awesome conversation. Take advantage of it while he still offers it. Okay. Thoughts on owner financing real estate as opposed to renting it out? That puts tax, insurance, maintenance on the buyer. You keep the down payment and the monthly. I'm going to go ahead and let Jason answer that. I've got some thoughts on it, but I'm really curious to hear what he has to say.
George, I didn't quite catch that whole question. I knew about keeping, it's a little hard for me to read that. Just a moment. Yeah, this is, George and I are literally sending smoke signals to each other, folks.
All right, let me say.
It's gone now.
Thoughts on owner financing real estate or renting it out? Pros and cons.
Well, if you can buy real estate and get the owner to provide good financing, that's usually fantastic. But it's very rare nowadays because the owner doesn't want to loan you the money or carry back the paper on their own property at artificially low interest rates.
I think he's saying from the standpoint of an owner, if you own the property, do you,
like selling it?
Yeah.
Well, I would definitely rent it out because you don't want to sell it if it's a good property.
Okay. I think that sums it up right there.
If it's a good property, keep it.
Mm-hmm.
Rent it. Don't sell it.
Ike, thanks for the super.
Here, just a thought on that, George. You know, if you sell the property and you finance it for the buyer, you're becoming the lender. And many of your listeners believe that we are facing an inflationary future.
Good point.
Lenders get destroyed by inflation. Borrowers win. So keep the mortgage that you've borrowed on that property and let someone else pay that mortgage for you. This is the double arbitrage. It's a great deal. We believe in real estate investing. We believe you should keep the properties as long as they're good properties.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Okay, Ike asks, thanks for the super chat. Ike, question for both Jason and George. I'm 20 years old, got a good job, making middle income where I am. Congratulations, Ike. How would you recommend I start growing my income? I save well, and I'm doing 10% in gold, want to buy houses, etc. Since there's a lag, I'm going to go ahead and take that question first. For a young person like yourself, Ike, I think the best possible financial decision that you can make is to house hack. And Jason may disagree, and I'm curious to hear what he says, but if you go out and buy a triplex or a fourplex and you can live in one of those units and then have your tenants not only pay your mortgage, but have a positive cash flow coming in from that, plus if you can maybe secure that with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, you can take the amount of money that you would have spent on rent or whatever housing payment you have, and you can reinvest that money. And what I want you to do, when the live stream is done, is I want you to go to a compound interest rate calculator and just go ahead and Google it. And in that, you'll be able to assign a value to however many years. So just pretend those are months, and then just put in 1,000. Let's say your rent payment would be $1,000 or $1,500 a month for the next 30 years. So put that $1,500 a month in there, and then just compound it at, let's say, 7%, and see what you get. You'll find that if you can do that for 30 or 35 years, especially at your age, my goodness, if you could do that, well, let's just say for 30 or 35 years, you're going to have probably $1 million saved up. You're going to be a millionaire just because you didn't have a housing payment your entire life. And of course, you might not live there your whole life, but you'll own the asset. And then at the end, when you want to retire, let's say at 55, now you've got a fourplex that's paying you that you own outright, that your renters paid for you. And let's say now you've got 6-7 grand coming in gross, let's say $4,000 net per month. And that could be your retirement, because by the time you retire, I hate to break it to you, but the chances of you getting Social Security are just about zero. And even if you do get it, it's not going to have much purchasing power. So if you're able to do that at 20 years old, not only do you become a millionaire through just saving and investing the amount of money you would have spent on housing, but then you have that asset that you can leverage. You can do a lot of interesting things with the equity. But at the end, it's your retirement plan. So personally, I think that's the best financial decision that a young person can make in your shoes.
So one of the great things about that, the house hacking thing is a good idea. It depends where you live, right? So you may not live in an area where you can pull that off. If you live in an expensive city, it's not going to work. That's the only problem. So it depends where you live. If you can buy an inexpensive plex type property, that's a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, live in one, rent the others, great, more power to you. You just may not live in the city where that's possible. So in that case, you just got to buy a rental property.
Yeah.
You can't do it in Los Angeles, for example. It won't work. The numbers will not work.
Okay, Stacy, thank you for the super chat. She's got a question for Jason. She says, I contacted your company December 13th, but have not received a call.
We're talking about Stacy on Voxer here. Yeah.
Have you made contact with her? Stacy Meyer?
Yes. I heard that. Adam said he emailed you right after your contact, but it may have been filtered. And I'm guessing, Stacy, that email's in your spam folder. Please call us at 1-800-HARTMAN. That's 1-800-HARTMAN. Of course, we'll be absolutely happy to help you. Adam said that he did email you right after that, but you probably didn't receive it. Sorry about that.
Okay. And Stacy, if you have any further questions or want an alternate way to get a hold of Jason, make sure that you email me through Sebastian. Again, it's georgegammon.contact@gmail.com, and I can make sure that we make a connection there. Dimitri, thanks for the super chat. Dimitri asks, George, do you think New York City will face some kind of tax pension shock as Chicago? Yes, I do, Dimitri. I think that there's a lot of places in the United States that will very soon be in the same type of crisis situation that Illinois is in.
Yeah.
I was doing a roundtable discussion the other day, and I made the point, and I truly believe this, that if you look at what's happening in California and in New Jersey and places like Illinois, I think in the next 5 years, or maybe even less, but the next 5 to 10 years for sure, that you're going to see those things playing out in the rest of the United States. So if you want to look at what the end game is for your state, let's say you live in Washington or Oregon, just look at California and just know that they're about 5 years ahead of you. Okay, Sebastian, did you have something? What is that? What time? Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, got it. Okay, thanks. All right, so that was Dimitri's question. Conrad, thank you for the super.
It's actually even worse than that, right? Because what these places are doing, and California is doing this, they're finding all sorts of ways to build what I call economic Berlin walls, so that they make it hard to leave, because everybody's trying to escape these places now, right? Like California, the out-migration out of California by successful people, by middle-class people, they're just leaving. They're fed up with the tax rates and the regulation and the intrusive government and the high cost of living. And you know where they're going. They're going to Texas, Nevada, Arizona, and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And same is true with New York. I mean, Florida is, everybody's becoming a Florida resident, even if they live part-time in New York City.
Yeah. Okay, Conrad, thanks for the super chat. Conrad, can VA disability pay disappear in a recession? He says for George and Jason. Let me go ahead and take the ball on this one and run with it. We'll see if Jason has anything to add. I think it's a lot like Social Security, Conrad. And if you haven't seen my video on, it's one of the inflation videos where I talk about how the CPI, because it's not accurate, it really screws the people who are getting benefits from the government. So let me explain this a little further. Benefits such as VA disability and Social Security are tied to the CPI. So that means that the government pays you a little bit more every single year based on how much the CPI goes up. So if the CPI, and they don't use the CPI specifically, but it's a measurement like that. So if that measurement goes up by 3%, well, then the next year your Social Security payment or your disability payment goes up by 3%. But if they're understating inflation, let's say the real rate of inflation is 7%. So your bills, your expenses are going up by 7 or 10% a year, but your income stream that you're getting from the government is only increasing by 3% per year. Well, it doesn't sound like a big deal for 1 year, but just compound that over 20 or 25 years, and then you get to a point where you're taking a huge loss. And I actually break down the math in that video, and I think I went back to maybe 1990, and I did the math on how much those people have lost if we measured CPI for the Social Security payments and the disability payments, like if we measured the inflation rate the same way that we did in the 80s, or it gets even worse in the 70s, that the person that's getting $1,000 a month from the United States government right now today in 2020 would actually be getting $2,200 a month if they would have adjusted for inflation just the same way that they did in the 1980s. So my point is that I don't think that disability will disappear, but they're going to default on you. They're going to default on you through inflation and through the scam that is the CPI, and by understating that CPI. And Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, George, that was very well said. You know, there are three basic ways that they lie about the consumer price index: hedonics, weighting, and substitution. And George has explained this on his prior videos, but that is so true. It's the insidious hidden tax. It is making people poorer and poorer and poorer gradually. And it's one of the many ways the government just rips us off. And sadly, it rips off our veterans. I mean, the people that have risked their lives and made great sacrifices for the country. So it's very tragic that they do that. But they do that with all government benefits. And that's why the government has a vested interest in understating the real inflation rate, because the government benefits are indexed and all the government employee pay is indexed to the CPI or various like indexes. And so you know they're going to understate it because they have to pay less. And so it's a terrible thing. You've got to invest in a way that you can outsmart them at their own game.
Yeah, that's right. And what I would add to that, just to end on a positive note, is like Jason is saying, that the government needs inflation. That's how they're going to screw you. That's how they're going to take your purchasing power from you. But if you go into a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, then you're placing yourself on the side of the government, so you will benefit from that inflation. So on one side you're benefiting, and on this, so you're kind of hedging your bets because you're losing on one side, but you're benefiting on the other. And so a lot of people say, well, Jason or George, I can't invest right now. What's an average guy to do? I can't do all these things that you talk about. The very first thing that the average Joe can do is make sure that their house payment, if you've got a mortgage, just make sure that it's a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And that's something that anyone can own a home, or anyone that owns a home can do starting tomorrow. Okay, the High Viz Economist asks, George, you understand exactly what I meant about helicopter money in the FDIC. Cool, very cool. I'm glad I got that one on the nose. Could Jason mute his Skype and just watch this on YouTube for the audio? Listen, you're asking the wrong guy here, buddy. You got to know what you don't know. And I know a lot about how the monetary system works and all the things that I talk about on my videos, but I will be the first person to admit that I know nothing about technology. And we were working on this the whole day, trying to figure out how to make this work to where Jason could answer questions at the same time. And it's just, you know, we did what we could. So next time Jason comes on the live stream, I think he's going to do this once a month. It's very kind to offer his time to come in here and specifically answer real estate questions for you guys. But the next time we'll have this set up so the audio is good. He's actually here on the screen, and we'll have it dialed in. Okay, John, thank you for the super chat, John. All right, so we've gone over an hour and a half. Let's take just maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll call it a night. Oh, let me go to the bottom here. Okay, question. Oh. It says, George, do you ever consider raw land? If so, what do you look for? No, I don't. And the reason I don't consider raw land is because it doesn't pay me to own it. And it's a speculation because you're just hoping that the price goes up. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I've made as an investor is I bought land, I still own it, in Ecuador, and it is primo, beachfront, gorgeous, the best piece of property in the most high desirable or high demand area. And I was going to develop it, and then I decided not to, and I put it up for sale, and it's been a couple years now. And it's not that prices have really gone down, it's just there's only 15 million people in the entire country. So you don't really have a lot of buyers. It takes you 3 or 4 years to sell it. And if I would have bought a house on the beach instead of a piece of land, even if you don't have a lot of liquidity, I'd be collecting $2,000 a month from that thing being rented out. So learn from my mistakes, and that's why I don't like land.
And George, I second that motion, of course. I talk about this on my podcast all the time. I do not believe in raw land because it's a one-dimensional asset class. It's total speculation. It's like buying a non-dividend paying stock or precious metals. There's no income from it. Their financing is terrible, if at all. So buy property, buy investments that are multidimensional, that provide self-liquidating debt, that provide tax benefits, that have really good financing, so you don't have to pay for the entire asset yourself. And that's why income property, I love it.
Yeah, for your investments, I want to just add one quick thing there, is if you've got that little bucket, that 5 or 10% of your portfolio that you've allocated specifically to speculation, then okay, land might, if you think this is going to be a home run in 10 years, you want to go into Venezuela right now and get a real cheap beachfront property on Margarita Island, that you have my full blessing. But make sure that you're not looking at that as an investment, but you're actually looking at that as a speculation. Okay, so, I think we got one more super chat here. Okay, one more super chat, and then we'll call it a night. From Highland Neurosurgery, thank you very much. I saw your video on inflation. If you had information that the interest rate will rise sharply in 2020, what do you do? So, okay, well, the first thing is if you've got mortgage debt, like we've said many times here, you've got to make sure that you got a fixed rate. And if you are under the belief that interest rates will go up, you've got to make sure that you don't own any long-term bonds. I mean, I would be out of risk assets because that's really going to hurt. Boy, you're going to have the U.S. and the economy and assets are going to have, like, everything's going to go down at the same time if you have that situation unfold. And if you haven't listened to the interview that I did with Eric Townsend on Saturday, I'd strongly suggest listening to that, because he goes into great detail on how for up until 10 years ago, it was always assumed by financial planners and everyone out there in financial markets that the way that you hedge your risk in a portfolio is you have about a 60% allocation to stocks and maybe a 40% allocation to bonds, or maybe vice versa, depending on your age. Why is that? Because everyone thought that if stocks go up, then probably bonds will go down, and if stocks go down, bonds will go up. So you're hedging your bets. And if you really want to maintain your purchasing power, and this is them talking, not me, then that's what you do. Well, in the last 10 years, we've seen that stocks and bonds have gone up at the exact same time. But of course, no one's complaining about that because everyone that owns those financial assets, they're getting rich. So they don't care. So the financial planners aren't going back and looking at that strategy that they've been recommending for the last 50 years and saying, well, wait a minute here. If stocks have gone up and bonds have gone up, the prices at the same time, well, that means that everything we've been recommending to people over the last 50 years is completely untrue. They're just kind of sweeping that under the rug and hoping people don't realize that, and then just saying, oh yeah, still 60-40 stock bond split. And what they're not explaining to you, obviously, is that if stocks and bonds can both go up in price at the same time, that means they can go down in price at the same time. And I don't see how they both wouldn't go down at the same time if interest rates go up in 2020, let's say. They don't even have to normalize. I mean, Eric Townsend, who is the host of Macro Voices, is an absolute pro on this. And his opinion that if rates even got above 3.5%, that would totally crush the stock market and the bond market at the same time. So I hate to end on a sour note there, but that's just, I got to call it like I see it. So guys, I really appreciate everyone sticking with us here. I think we had up to 500 people on the live stream at one time, which is fantastic. And I know it was a little bit makeshift here, but I think we got through it. And I look forward to seeing everyone on tomorrow's video. If you want to book my time, I probably won't be doing that for too much longer. You can get a hold of Sebastian at georgegammon.contact@gmail.com. If you want to check out my buddy, Jason Hartman, I would strongly suggest listening to his podcast, subscribing to that, The Creating Wealth Show. He's been doing it since 2006. He has over 1,000 episodes that he's done from people that, trust me, you'll love. Guys like Thomas Sowell, Ron Paul, and that's just to name a few, along with a lot of other real estate experts, and yours truly, of course. And then if you want any information on what he does, just go to jasonhartman.com. Jason, any final thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you, George. It was great being on. I heard two of you all night, so it was challenging, but it was great, and I really enjoyed your audience. Great questions, everybody, and happy investing. Thanks for having me.
Okay.